He was sitting on the front steps of my house when I pulled into the driveway. Not the porch swing, not the doorbell, the steps, with a duffel bag on one side and my grandson on the other, and my grandson was asleep against his shoulder the way little kids sleep when they've been crying too long and their bodies just give out. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. My son is 37 years old. He has his father's eyes and his grandmother's stubborn jaw, and he almost never asks for help. When he broke his collarbone at 19, he drove himself to the urgent care and called me afterward. When his marriage started falling apart 2 years ago, I found out from a neighbor before I heard it from him. So when I saw him on those steps, I knew. I got out of the car. I didn't ask what happened. I picked up the duffel bag and I said, "Come inside." His name is Kevin. My grandson is 4 years old and his name is Miles. And the woman who had just changed the locks on a house that my son had been paying rent on for 14 months was my daughter-in-law's mother. A woman I had met exactly 9 times in 3 years. A woman who had shaken my hand at the wedding and told me she was so glad her daughter had married into a good family, and who had spent the 2 years since then making my son's life into something I don't have a polite word for. Her name is not important. I will call her what Kevin called her, which was simply his mother-in-law. I have my own words for her, but I will keep those to myself. Kevin sat down at my kitchen table and I put the kettle on and I waited. Miles was still asleep. Kevin had laid him on the couch with a throw blanket, and now he was just sitting there looking at his hands. "She called a locksmith," he said finally. I said, "When?" "This morning, around 11. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I was at work. I got a text from Jenna saying she was done, and I needed to come get my things. When I got there, there was a key on the mat and an envelope with my name on it. The new key didn't work." I set a mug in front of him. "The envelope had a note in it," he said. "It said the locks had been changed for Jenna's safety and that any attempt to re-enter would be considered trespassing." I sat down across from him. "Now, before I tell you what I said next, I want to explain something about myself, because it matters for the rest of this story. I am 63 years old. I taught middle school English for 11 years. Then I went back to school at 41, which my own mother thought was the most absurd thing she'd ever heard. I got my paralegal certification, then I kept going, and I passed the bar at 45. I have been a practicing attorney for 18 years. I specialize in residential property law and landlord-tenant disputes in the state of Ohio. I did not tell my daughter-in-law's mother this at the wedding. It didn't come up. Why would it? We talked about the flowers and whether the chicken or the salmon was better, and I held my new daughter-in-law's hand and told her she looked beautiful because she did. But I knew, sitting at that kitchen table, that what had just happened to my son was not simply a domestic dispute. It was an illegal lockout. "Kevin," I said, "is your name on the lease?" He nodded. "Joint lease. Jenna and I both signed it." "And her mother. Where does she come into this?" He looked up. "She owns the house." I sat with that for a moment. "She owns the house," I repeated. "Yeah. Jenna's mom bought it like 5 years ago as a rental property. When Jenna and I were looking for a place, she offered it to us. She said it would be easier than dealing with a stranger landlord. It seemed like a good idea at the time." I did not say what I thought about that arrangement, because Kevin was already aware of what I thought about that arrangement. I had thought it was a bad idea from the moment I heard it. You do not let your mother-in-law be your landlord. You do not let your landlord be your mother-in-law. This is not wisdom I invented. This is just common sense that people in love tend to ignore. But that was then. "Do you have a copy of the lease?" I asked. "I think so, maybe on email." "And you've been paying rent every month?" "Every month." 14 months. We split it, Jenna and me, but I set up the bank transfer so it came from my account. I have all those records. I nodded slowly. "Kevin," I said, "what she did this morning is not legal. I need you to understand that. It does not matter that Jenna is her daughter. It does not matter that she owns the property. You are a tenant on a signed lease, and you have rights that no landlord, including a mother-in-law who is furious with you, can override by calling a locksmith." He stared at me. but the note said trespassing. The note is not the law. I stood up and went to get my laptop. In Ohio, a landlord cannot change the locks on a tenant without going through the court. She cannot lock you out, remove your belongings, shut off utilities, or take any action that deprives you of access to that property without following proper legal procedure. What she did this morning is called a self-help eviction. It is illegal, and I have handled cases exactly like this. Kevin was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I don't want to make this worse." I looked at him. "I know," I said. "I know you don't. That's who you are. But Kevin, she put you and a 4-year-old on the street this morning. She didn't give you notice. She didn't go through a court. She just decided that she was done and changed a lock, and she is counting on you not knowing that she can't do that." I paused. "I know that you know." He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, but almost. "So what do we do?" he asked. "First, you're gonna stay here. As long as you need. Miles too. That is not a discussion." I opened my laptop. "Second, you're going to forward me every email you have about that lease, the rent payments, and anything her mother sent you in writing. Everything. Third, I am going to make a phone call in the morning." "To who?" "To her. I want to tell you about my daughter-in-law because she is not the villain of this story, even though it might sound that way." Jenna and Kevin met at a mutual friend's birthday party when they were both 33. She is smart and funny, and she loves Miles more than she loves almost anything, and I genuinely liked her. I still do. In the way that you can like someone and also recognize that a marriage between two specific people was simply not working. They had problems I won't detail here because they are private and they are theirs and not mine to put into a story. What I will say is that the separation had been coming for a long time, and Kevin had been doing his best to handle it with dignity. He wanted mediation. He wanted a parenting plan that was fair. He wanted, above all, for Miles to be okay. What he did not want was a fight. And that, I think, is what his mother-in-law counted on. She had never liked Kevin. I had suspected this from early on. From small things, the way she spoke over him at family dinners, the way she referred to Jenna's choices before Kevin as though they were the ones that made sense. She had a way of being pleasant to your face while making you feel, somehow, like an inconvenience. Kevin bore it. He is, as I said, a patient man. But patience has a way of being mistaken for weakness by people who are looking for it. She had decided, I think, that Kevin would simply go, that Jenna would tell him it was over, and he would pack what he could and disappear, and she would get her house back and her daughter back, and things would return to some version of normal that suited her. She had not considered that Kevin might have somewhere to go. She had not considered me. I called her at 9 o'clock the next morning. Kevin was in the backyard with Miles, pushing him on the old swing set we never took down after Kevin grew up. I had made myself a second cup of coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table and I dialed. She answered on the third ring. "Hello?" Her voice was guarded. She didn't know my number well enough to have saved it. "Good morning," I said. "This is Kevin's mother. I hope I'm not calling too early." A pause. "Oh," she said. "No, not at all." And then, with that particular tone women of a certain type use when they are surprised and trying not to show it, "How are you?" "I'm well, thank you. Kevin and Miles are staying with me. I wanted to call because I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot yesterday, and I'd like to see if we can straighten some things out before this becomes more complicated than it needs to be." Another pause. Longer this time? "I appreciate that," she said. "I want you to know that what I did wasn't personal. Jenna is my daughter and I was protecting her." "I understand," I said. "And I want you to know that I'm not calling to argue about the marriage. That's between Kevin and Jenna, and my hope is that they can work through it respectfully for Miles's sake." I took a sip of coffee. "I'm calling because I need to make you aware of something, and I'd rather do that directly than have it come up later in a way that's more difficult for everyone." "What's that?" Changing the locks on a tenant without going through the court eviction process is an illegal lockout under Ohio Revised Code, Section 5321.15. Kevin is a named tenant on a current valid lease. As of yesterday morning, you are in violation of that statute. Silence. I let it sit there. Now, I continued, I'm not telling you this to threaten you. I'm telling you because I practice residential property law and I want to give you the opportunity to correct this before it goes any further. Kevin is entitled to reentry. He's entitled to a proper notice period. And frankly, given the circumstances, a young child, no warning, belongings still inside, I think a court would take a rather dim view of how this was handled. I own that house, she said. Her voice had changed. The pleasantness was gone. You do. And Kevin has a signed lease on that house. Those two things are not in conflict under the law. They simply mean that you have responsibilities as a landlord, the same as any landlord would. He needs to leave. Jenna doesn't want him there. Then the appropriate process is a formal notice to vacate followed by a court filing if he doesn't comply. That process takes time and it follows a specific procedure. What you did yesterday is not part of that procedure. I paused. I'd like to suggest something. Kevin is not trying to stay in that house. He is not fighting to save the marriage. He wants a fair process. If you restore his access, he will work with Jenna on a proper timeline to vacate in writing, with a specific date that's reasonable under the law. That gives everyone a clear path forward and it keeps this out of a courtroom. More silence. I'll have to talk to my lawyer, she said finally. Of course, I said. Please do. I'd be happy to speak with them directly if that would help. I'll give you a few days. I kept my voice even. I do want to be honest with you about one thing, because I think honesty is better for everyone right now. If this doesn't resolve, Kevin has a strong case for damages under the statute, actual damages, any costs he's incurred, and potentially attorney's fees. I am prepared to file on his behalf if necessary. I prefer not to, but I will. She did not say anything. I hope you have a good morning, I said. Please give Jenna my best. And I hung up. Kevin came in from the backyard 20 minutes later with Miles on his hip, both of them a little windblown and Miles eating a graham cracker that had appeared from somewhere. How'd it go? Kevin asked. She's calling her lawyer, I said. Is that good or bad? It's good. People who are certain they're in the right don't call lawyers. They dig in. She called a lawyer because some part of what I said landed. He put Miles down and my grandson toddled over to investigate the dog bowl, which has been empty for 6 years since we lost our beagle, but children find it fascinating. Mom, Kevin said, what if she doesn't back down? Then we file, and we win. I said it simply because it was simply true. But Kevin, I want you to think about something. Whatever happens with the house, the legal piece that we can handle, I want to know how you're doing. Not the logistics. You. He was quiet for a moment. I feel stupid, he said, for not knowing, for standing there looking at that key on the mat thinking I didn't have any options. You didn't know what you didn't know, I said. That's not stupidity. That's just being a person in a hard situation. No one tells you this stuff until you meet it. He looked at me for a moment. Why'd in here? Against it you ever tell me you could do this? Like, I knew you were a lawyer, but I didn't think about it. I didn't think to call you. I smiled at that. You called me, I said. You just didn't call me with questions. You showed up on my steps, and I was here. He nodded. He looked like he might say something else, and then he didn't, and that was fine. Some things don't need more words. Her lawyer called me 3 days later. He was pleasant, a little careful, the way lawyers are when they know they're holding a weak hand. We talked for about 25 minutes. He confirmed that his client understood her obligations and wanted to resolve this without litigation. He proposed that Kevin be given re-entry within 48 hours to collect his belongings and that they would agree to a formal 30-day notice period to run concurrently from that date. I asked for 60 days. Given that Kevin had a child and was in the process of securing a new residence, we settled on 45. I also asked that she restore the original key rather than handing Kevin a new one, which I knew was a small thing. But small things sometimes matter to people who have been humiliated, and Kevin was still my son even in the middle of a property negotiation. She agreed to that too. I wrote up a short memorandum confirming the terms, had both parties sign it, and filed a copy in case we ever needed it. Kevin went back to the house the following Saturday. His sister went with him, my daughter Patrice, who is 34 and has no patience for nonsense, and was at the house before Kevin arrived just to make sure. They took what was most important, Miles's things first, his bed, his books, the particular stuffed rabbit he cannot sleep without. Then Kevin's work files and his tools and his grandmother's clock that sits on the mantle of whatever home he's in, because it was his when she passed. He left a lot behind that day, not because anyone made him, just because some things stop feeling like yours when the circumstances around them change. He didn't cry until he was back in my driveway. I let him. The 45 days passed. Kevin moved into an apartment about 12 minutes from my house, a 2-bedroom, second floor, and Miles has his own room with a window that looks out onto a maple tree, which Miles considers to be the most important feature of any dwelling. The divorce is ongoing. It is not pretty and it is not easy, and Jenna and Kevin are both doing their best with something that no one is ever really ready for. I stay out of it. That is not my place. But I show up on Saturday mornings when Kevin has Miles, and I take him to the park, or we bake something, or we read books on my porch swing, the one his grandfather built 32 years ago, and that has held up through more than I can count. Miles calls me Nana and has no idea what the last several months have really meant. He knows the maple tree and the porch swing and his rabbit, and that there is usually something good to eat when he comes to my house. That, for now, is enough. I tell this story not because I want credit for knowing the law or because I think my son's situation is unusual. It is not. What happened to Kevin happens to people more often than most realize. One person in a household has more legal knowledge, or more money, or more connections, and the other person is simply outmaneuvered before they even understand the game that's being played. The thing that saved Kevin was not that his mother is a lawyer. It was that he showed up. He didn't handle it alone and quietly until it was too late. He didn't assume he had no options. He drove to my house. Or maybe he didn't drive. Maybe he just ended up there the way you end up somewhere when you're overwhelmed and you know at some level where safety is. And he sat on those steps and he let me see him. If you were in something like this, if someone has changed the locks or threatened you or told you that you have no rights in a situation where you actually do, I want you to know a few things. In most states, a landlord cannot legally lock you out without going through the court process, regardless of the circumstances. That is true even if the landlord is a family member, even if the relationship has broken down, even if they own the property outright. As a tenant with a signed lease, you have rights and there are procedures that must be followed. Document everything. Keep your lease, your payment records, any written communication. That paper trail is what makes a case. And find someone who knows what they're talking about, even if that person is a legal aid clinic or a tenant rights hotline rather than someone's actual mother. You do not have to figure this out alone. If you are dealing with a situation involving property rights, custody access, or a lockout, whether you're the one who was locked out or you're trying to understand your options, tell me in the comments. I try to respond to everyone. I am not your attorney, and this is not legal advice, but I have been doing this for a long time, and sometimes the most useful thing is just knowing where to start. My son is going to be okay. Not because everything worked out perfectly, because it didn't, and it probably won't for a while, but because he knew, eventually, that there was somewhere to go. There always is. I keep thinking about that duffel bag. Not the legal case, not the phone call, not the statute number, not the memorandum I drafted on my kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night. Just that bag, one bag for a 37-year-old man and a 4-year-old boy, sitting on my front steps like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence someone else had written for my son. That is what people who use power carelessly do not think about. They think about the outcome they want, They think about the door and the lock and the key on the mat. They do not think about the bag. They do not think about what it means to reduce a person's life to what they could carry when they were scared and caught off guard and did not yet know they had options. Kevin had options. He just didn't know it yet. And that is the thing that stays with me. Not that his mother-in-law broke the law, because people break laws out of anger and panic, and the mistaken belief that ownership means unlimited authority. What stays with me is how close he came to simply accepting it, to picking up that bag and walking away from something that was legally his, because no one had ever told him otherwise. I have spent 18 years in property law watching that happen, quietly, constantly. Someone with more information, more connections, more confidence walks into a situation and walks away with more than they were entitled to, and the other person goes home and wonders what they did wrong. The system is not rigged exactly, but it rewards people who know how it works, and it is very patient with people who don't. What I want Miles to understand someday, when he's old enough to understand anything, is that what protected his father was not luck. It was not that his grandmother happened to be a lawyer, though that helped with the timing. What protected Kevin was that he was honest about being lost. He showed up. He sat on those steps and he didn't pretend he had it handled, and that took more courage than most people realize. There is a particular kind of strength in admitting that you are in over your head. It is not the dramatic kind. It doesn't look like strength from the outside, but it is the kind that actually changes things. His mother-in-law was not a stupid woman. She knew property. She had owned that house for 5 years and she had managed tenants before. What she did not have was the discipline to stop and ask whether what she wanted to do was what she was legally allowed to do. That gap between what we want and what we are entitled to, between impulse and consequence, that gap is where most of the damage in these situations happens. She acted fast and she acted out of anger and she did not think it through, and the result was a legal exposure that her own attorney had to spend 45 minutes walking back. Wanting something badly enough to act on it is not the same as being right. I taught English before I taught law, and there is something from both that I keep returning to: the importance of understanding the rules before you decide which ones apply to you. Not because the rules are always fair, they are not, and I have seen that too, but because you cannot navigate a system you refuse to learn. Kevin learned. He asked. He handed me his lease and his bank records, and he trusted me to find the path. And we did. Miles will not remember this year. He will remember the maple tree and the porch swing and the graham crackers and Nana. That is exactly as it should be. But Kevin will remember, and I hope what he carries forward, not the anger, not the humiliation of that morning, but the thing underneath it, is the knowledge that showing up is enough to start, that you do not have to arrive with all the answers. You just have to get there. The rest, we figure out together.